You notice her tone shift the moment you grow strong. You sense her retreat when you set a boundary. You feel the tension in her glance when you refuse to soften. It's subtle, but it's there, like a cold current under warm water. You might call it mood, but Freud called it symbolic emasculation. This isn't about physical withholding. It's far more insidious. Her withdrawal becomes a weapon. Her silence becomes a sentence. Her shift in energy means your power is being tested, challenged, neutered. You shrug it off. Say you're overanalyzing. Maybe you tell yourself this is modern love, where feelings matter more than fire. But every time you dim your baritone, swallow your edge, mute your mission, you're feeding the vessel of weakness she's building in your absence. Freud coined a term, the Castration Complex. Not literal loss, but a symbolic cutting, where your power isn't removed with a blade, but trimmed with emotion, retraction, and subtle control. It's the highest art of emasculation, never violent, always seductive, never obvious, always effective. She doesn't need to scream. She doesn't need to nag. She doesn't need to threaten. She just doesn't lean into you when you lean into yourself. And when that happens enough, self-doubt sprouts. You pause. You second guess. You soften. That's not compromise. That's contraction. She's not asking for vulnerability. She's inviting collapse. This complex lives in the way she pushes you to sacrifice your ambition for comfort, in the way she implies you're too much for being direct, in the way she celebrates your compliance as emotional intelligence. She's not celebrating, she's neutering. And you let it happen because you've never seen the blade. Freud's work cuts through the veil. The solution isn't anger, it's awareness and clarity. You don't fight her, you stand. You don't speak loud, you speak right. Because when you're awake to this castration, internal and interpersonal, it loses its power. This is your initiation. Do you want to be the man she molds into something smaller? Or the man who watches the mold break and still stands? That's where we begin. It never comes all at once. That's what makes it effective. It starts with a pause after you speak your mind, just long enough to plant doubt. Then a joke. Don't be so intense. A side comment. You always have to be right. A glance, not disgusted, but dismissive. She's trimming, not violently, strategically. You give in once. She smiles. You shrink a little. You call it compromise. You do it again. Soon, the edge you once walked on becomes a comfort mat. You weren't cut down. You laid yourself down. Freud knew this pattern, not because he theorized it in some sterile lab, but because he watched men unravel under emotional negotiation. Castration wasn't literal. It was psychological, symbolic. A man who once stood firm now second-guesses everything, not because of fear, but because of love distorted into guilt. You feel it every time you hesitate before telling the truth. You feel it when you water down your speech to keep peace. You feel it when you fake softness just to avoid tension. You think it's maturity. It's not. It's surrender in disguise. And here's the genius of how it works. You're made to believe it's for the relationship, that if you were just more emotionally available, more gentle, more passive, everything would flow. But here's the thing. It doesn't flow. It stagnates. Because you weren't built to be passive. You were built to press forward, to speak plainly, to act with clean intent. She may not even know she's doing it. That's the twist. Sometimes it's conscious, sometimes it's inherited. Generational resentment passed down through culture. Feminine pain seeking control, not healing. It doesn't always look hostile. It often wears the mask of concern. Don't work so much. You're not really going to wear that, are you? I think you're overreacting. just wish you were a little more patient." Sounds reasonable, right? But it's not what's said, it's what's underneath. A pull towards smallness, towards self-policing. You become the man who edits himself in real time, not out of integrity, but out of subtle survival. This is the castration Freud warned you about, not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind, the kind that strips you without leaving a mark. And if you keep playing along, there won't be anything left to stand on when life really calls on you to rise. You think this is just about love, just about the tension with your partner, the softness in your speech, the way you silence your instincts. But it doesn't stop there. It never does. The man who's been symbolically cut doesn't just lose ground with her. He loses it everywhere. At work, you feel it when you hesitate to speak up. Not because you lack intelligence, but because the voice in your head tells you, "Don't rock the boat." You used to lead. Now you ask for permission to have ideas. You used to set the tone. Now you adjust to someone else's rhythm and call it teamwork. You're not part of a team. You're fading into a background noise of men who once had something to say and forgot how to say it. In bed, it shows up in your energy. You want her, but not with clarity, with neediness, not with grounded desire, with fragile longing. She can feel it. You're not penetrating her world. You're asking for access to it. You've confused permission with passion. That's not attraction. That's erosion. Your presence is no longer sharp. It's compliant. Freud knew this, that the libido, once weakened by guilt and shame, doesn't disappear. It mutates. You don't stop wanting. You just stop claiming. You don't stop feeling the fire. You just douse it in anxiety and pretend it's love. And what happens next is even worse. You begin to reward your own collapse. You tell yourself you're being emotionally mature for not confronting her outbursts. You pat yourself on the back for staying quiet during another one of her guilt trips. You feel noble for swallowing truth just to keep the house calm. But inside, you're boiling, silently, slowly, inevitably. And when you do snap, when that compressed rage erupts, you're the villain. And she gets to say, "See? You're unstable. You're the problem." This is not maturity. This is symbolic neutering, dressed up in emotional intelligence. You were not made to cower behind empathy. You were made to lead with strength. Not arrogance, not domination, but presence. Real, grounded presence that doesn't flinch when tested or fade when guilt is thrown like a net over your shoulders. Your fire is not the enemy, it's the cure. But if you keep treating it like something to be managed rather than wielded, you'll keep losing. Not just your power, your identity. You think this began with her. It didn't. The blueprint was written long before you loved a woman, before you touched one, before you even knew what you were becoming. It was in the house you were raised in the tone of the woman who birthed you, in the rules you were handed about what made a good boy. A good boy doesn't talk back. A good boy doesn't get angry. A good boy is gentle, sweet, obedient. Sound familiar? Freud said the fear of castration begins not with lovers, but with mothers, with the first woman who holds your life in her hands. She sets the pattern. She shows you how love works. But if her love came with conditions, with guilt, with shame, with reward for submission, then your very identity was formed through emotional trimming. You learned that being good meant being less loud, less intense, less truthful. So now you walk through your adult life pre-emasculated. You enter relationships already trained to avoid conflict. You think peace is your role, that leadership is aggression, that asserting yourself is violence. It's not. It's what you were never allowed to practice. This isn't about blame. This is about pattern. Freud didn't hate women. He just refused to ignore the psychic impact they had on men. especially during childhood, especially when they couldn't regulate their own emotions and made little boys carry the burden of soothing them. And if you grew up as the emotional caretaker of a wounded mother, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You learned to smile when you wanted to scream. You learned to stay silent when you needed support. You learned to keep her stable, even when you were falling apart. So is it really a surprise that now, as a man, you're still doing it? Only now she's your girlfriend, your wife, your lover, and the stakes feel higher. The withdrawal cuts deeper, the shame lands harder, and you repeat the same dynamic, hoping this time your compliance will be enough. But it never is, because she doesn't want your weakness. She tests it. She needs to feel the edge you buried under politeness and approval seeking. She needs to feel your spine, not your script. You think love will save you, but love without boundaries just repeats the wound. This isn't about hating women. This is about freeing yourself from the psychic chain Freud uncovered, the one that loops from mother to partner and cuts men down before they ever stand tall. And the first step out? Stop apologizing for wanting to stand. You don't need to be locked in a cell to be imprisoned. You just need to be told that your strength is dangerous and your softness is noble. That's how it works now. It doesn't come at you like war. It whispers like therapy. It doesn't shove you into a corner. It applauds your compliance. They don't beat the masculinity out of you. They sedate it with praise when you fold. Freud saw this long before you were born. He watched society weaponize guilt, not to control criminals, but to mold men. The system doesn't need you angry. It needs you agreeable. Not because it wants peace, but because obedient men are easy to manage. The new masculinity they sell you, it's been filtered, scrubbed, feminized. They tell you to be more emotionally available, more in touch, more communicative. But what they really mean is, be more like us. Less threatening, less stable, less decisive. They dress it up in nice words. Healthy masculinity, allyship, emotional safety. But read between the lines. Don't stand up unless you're told to. Don't challenge the narrative. Don't own your desire unless it's been approved. Don't trust your gut. Trust the feelings of the room. You scroll your feed. Every ad, every video, every influencer pushes one message under a dozen slogans: shrink. And they sell that shrinkage back to you as virtue. Freud didn't live in the age of TikTok, but he'd recognized the pattern. You're being conditioned to fear your edge, to associate leadership with violence, assertiveness with toxicity, sexuality with shame. Not because these things are inherently evil, but because they are powerful. And power unregulated is always feared by systems that want control. So they teach you to self-censor. They say you're healing, but really, you're hiding. And the worst part, you start believing it. You start thinking maybe you are too intense. Maybe your desire is inappropriate. Maybe your ambition is selfish. Maybe your instincts are outdated. So you outsource your truth to the room. You wait for her approval. You ask your therapist if it's okay to want. You go silent in a group just to be safe. And each time you do, you reinforce the inner script Freud warned about, the script of internal castration, the one that says, don't be you, be what they need, but here's the secret the culture doesn't want you to know. You were never too much. You were just never under their control. And that's what scared them. You've been living with a lie, a quiet one, the kind that doesn't scream, it seeps. It tells you that being less of a man makes you more of a person, that if you just tone it down, stay agreeable, keep the peace, and avoid being too much, everything will work out. It doesn't. It never did. The truth is, no woman respects a man who amputates himself for her feelings. She might smile, she might thank you, but underneath, something dies. Not because she's cruel, but because she's wired to want presence, not passivity. And if you keep offering safety over truth, comfort over clarity, you're not loving her, you're performing for her. You've been so focused on not being the villain that you became a ghost. Freud would tell you that's the price of internal castration. You're not just losing moments, you're losing identity. Piece by piece, apology by apology, compromise by compromise. You're slowly becoming a man who can't recognize his own reflection without asking for approval first. You tell yourself you're adapting, that you're growing, that you're healing. But healing without confrontation is just self-abandonment with nice language. You think you're gaining peace, but what you've lost is your edge, the one thing that made you feel alive. So here's the question. What if you stopped begging for validation and started reclaiming your authority? What if you stopped flinching every time someone disapproved? What if you trusted your clarity over her confusion? What if you let your masculinity take up space, not to dominate, but to anchor? You don't need to become aggressive. You need to become honest. And honesty, for a man in this culture, is war. Because your truth, unfiltered, unapologetic, unapproved, is the exact thing they've worked so hard to neutralize. They don't fear your fists. They fear your voice when it doesn't ask for permission. So stop apologizing for it. Reclaim your fire. Not the fire that burns the world down, but the one that burns through the lies you've been fed. You're not here to be domesticated. You're here to lead. And the first man you have to lead is yourself. If something hit, not just in your head but in your gut, speak on it. Let your words land in the comments and let them land raw. If you're walking this path, like this video and subscribe to the channel. You don't need a crown to rule. You just need your spine back. And it starts here.